The Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. Your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to our show today. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. In this first hour, we're going to be talking Texas politics. The state legislature is out now, and it is everybody's doing a big group hug and saying we've done a great job here. I'm curious to see if, in fact, that's the case. Joining me in this first hour here is Don Huffines. Don Huffines was a former senator from Texas. He had District 16, was it? District
That's
16?
correct. Senate District 16.
Senate District 16. He is a fifth-generation Texan. Don, I am a fifth-generation Texan, so our families go back a ways.
Absolutely, buddy. Congratulations on that.
We slipped in just before the Republic, just before it turned state, so we were a part of the Republic. But Don's been a longtime friend. He is... He's the CEO of Huffines Communities, isn't it?
Yes.
And, of course, the Huffines name, your father, or was a grandfather, started the Huffines auto companies,
he did,
sales companies.
In 1924.
1924, and you actually broke off, and you and your brother Philip do real estate issues, but you've got part of the family still stays into the Huffines family car business, I guess.
We sure do. It's a family-owned business, but my identical twin brother, Philip, and I run a land development company that we're very proud of. Now,
you've been to Republican conventions, you've been involved in that, but you had not run for office until about 5 or 6 years ago, and you decided to challenge Senator John Corona, a Republican, for that district, which is mostly, you say, sort of the north part of Dallas County, I guess, and primarying somebody's tough. John Corona had been around for a while. I saw you a few times. I'd been asked to speak at some Republican meetings, and you were there, and John was there, and I thought, well, this is going to be a tough challenge for you. But you pulled it off, and you became a state senator, and I would call one of the best disruptive state senators, because between you and Connie Burton, you really brought some new life to Austin in those two sessions. But now we've got a different legislature up there, and the last legislative session seemed to be sort of contentious, a lot of disagreement on things, and now everybody wants to seem to do a group hug. Was this a good legislative session, do you think?
Well, before we get to that, buddy, let me just say that, of course, to remind everybody, I lost the election in the fall to a Democrat. And I was in office 4 years representing the north half of Dallas County. And it was quite an honor, absolutely, and I enjoyed it. And I do miss it, particularly when they're in session. But I do like getting my calendar back also under control and my schedule. But yes, first I'd like to say that to the audience that to understand me, that I believe the fundamental role of government is to defend our God-given liberty. Mm-hmm. And everything else is really secondary to that. And so that's the lens I look through when I look at government. And I was active in the Republican Party for a long time. And when you think and you say that we were disruptive, we are. I was a little bit. But I was really just fighting for our party principles, what the grassroots wants. And we've got a great party platform, and I believe in it. And I've been to many state conventions supporting that platform, and I've been to 3 national conventions. And I believe in the GOP. I really do. And I know that we've got the answers. I know that our conservative philosophy is the right philosophy. And I really do believe that our best days are yet to dawn.
One of the things that you were long a champion of was education reform, especially giving children vouchers and other things to be able to create what we call educational choice. I think you backed education savings accounts during when you were a state senator. But we still don't. I mean, the legislature passed some education reform stuff, but it didn't actually create that. We're one of the most conservative states out there, and we still don't have educational vouchers in the state, do we?
We don't. And that was one of the main missed opportunities down there in Austin. I couldn't believe it because our lieutenant governor was a big supporter of school choice. I call it education freedom. And it was one of my primary goals to get done in the last 2 sessions. And it didn't happen. Matter of fact, no one even mentioned it this session. And to answer your original question, we had a lot of missed opportunities this session, but we had some good goals too. We made. I kind of give the legislature down there a B-, C+ grade. The biggest one, though, is what you just mentioned: our education freedom. I mean, to use the leverage, we funded education $6.5 billion more dollars the members did this session into more money, new money, and they rechanged all the funding formulas. And normally when a state does that, it gives them leverage to institute school choice, right? And
or at least some reforms if you need them.
Of course, even in a micro aspect of it, a small amount of it, but we weren't, no one even talked about it. And so I don't see that opportunity coming up anytime soon in Austin.
Basically, they just handed out money to teachers, and you can make the case, some don't agree, but you can make the case that teachers could deserve a raise, but they essentially handed out a lot of money and didn't actually get much in return for it, it seems like.
Oh, I totally agree. And most people, a lot of folks don't understand how much money Texas really does spend on education. I mean, we're going to be through 17, according to the TEA website, Texas Education Agency, we're going to spend $61 billion before this session annually on education. It's by far the biggest thing we spend our money on. And now we just allocated another 10% on top of that, another $6.5 billion. So it's the number one thing we spend money on, and growth in the education spending is, in the last 10 years, has increased almost 60%, and after this session, it's going to go up almost 70% in the last 11 years. So it is really increasing. I believe in school choice because I believe in competition. And government schools, people need to understand that government runs our schools. They pick the curriculum. They hire the administration, they hire the faculty, and these are really government schools. And we need opportunities for the average person to have a choice.
We have on the website today, pointofview.net, a link to the Texas Tribune's summary of the various bills that have been passed and going for the governor's signature. We don't know necessarily yet on whether or not he might veto some of those or put in a line item veto, and then a number of bills that would fail. So if you're interested in looking at what Texas did pass, you can go to pointofview.net, go to the show, and we have a link to the Texas Tribune piece on that. One of the things that I've heard some complaint about is the fact that they increased spending significantly. According to the Texas Tribune, spending increase over the 2-year period is going up about 16% over what it was in the last legislative session. That seems like a big increase.
It's massive. It's not big. It's massive. And I think it's really interesting that people in government forget whose the money really belongs to. Government doesn't create money. It takes money, right? It takes it from the taxpayer, and it takes it by force. So the money doesn't belong to them, and they love to spend it. I tell you, government never has enough money, and unfortunately, Texas has had a couple of good conservative budgets the last 2 sessions I was there, but this one really blew the top off of it as far as spending. And
so we'll be back with you in just a minute with continue our discussions with Senator Don Huffines. Stay with us.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
29 years ago, Alan Bloom wrote the book The Closing of the American Mind. Last week, Charles Koch wrote an op-ed with the same title. There's some similarities between the two, but also one important difference. Charles Koch looks back at the revolutionary technological advances we have made and now take for granted. He is concerned that government and the academy are stifling progress. When he attended MIT, he discovered that scientific and technological progress requires the free and open exchange of ideas. The same holds true for moral and social progress. In America, we used to believe that progress comes from the free exchange of ideas and from challenging other people's views and hypotheses. The spontaneous process of collaboration and challenge led to the technological advances we have today. Charles Koch is concerned that the U.S. is already far down the path to becoming a less open and free society, and the current cultural and political atmosphere threatens to make the situation worse. In previous commentaries, I've talked about how political correctness and bias against contrary views are transforming the colleges and universities. Charles Koch laments that education in America, and particularly in higher education, has become increasingly hostile to the free exchange of ideas. On many campuses, a climate of intellectual conformity has replaced open debate and inquiry, stifling discussion on a host of topics ranging from history to science to economics. Many liberals and progressives may dislike the Koch brothers, but I certainly hope that they would agree with his diagnosis. Nearly 3 decades ago, Alan Bloom wrote about how higher education failed democracy and impoverished the souls of today's students. Charles Koch now sees how the intellectual conformity on the campus and in government stifles innovation. This is the legacy of closed minds. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Merrill Matthews, welcome back. And we are joined right now by former Senator Don Huffines as we're talking about the Texas legislative session. And Don, they went into this session saying we need to do property tax reform. That was sort of the biggest thing. Then they came up and said, well, we need to pay for this. Maybe we need to have an increase in the state sales tax. And that seemed to come out of nowhere. I mean, I never heard them saying in this issue, we need to come up and pay for this with the sales tax. That sort of came up. As I understand it, they did pass some property tax reform, but they did not include the sales tax. What's the issue on the property tax reform? That and school finance have been just burdens around our neck for years.
Oh, that's really true, buddy. Let me just say that there was another real quick missed opportunity. I'm going to get to your question, and that was the Senate passed a bill for a constitutional amendment to limit the state budget to population plus inflation growth. And the House killed that, and it didn't get anywhere. And that was another real missed opportunity because at this session, like you said, spending increase double digits, anywhere from 13 to 16%, depends how you figure it. And that's about 8% more than population growth plus inflation. And that money could have been returned back to the taxpayers, who it's their money on it. But yeah, we've been bedeviled by school finance and property taxes relief is the number one issue going into the session that was facing the members. And we started out really bad in the session, coming up with more taxes. Tax swaps never work, and that's what they were working on, and that didn't work. So they finally recognized it, I think, with the grassroots support, that we're not going to do a menial sales tax increase, a 1 cent sales tax increase to take a menial tax reduction in our property taxes, because we'll end up with higher, taxes both directions. So right now we got a $5 billion tax cut it's just buy down on the tax rate from the school districts, and it's going to be about an 8 cent to 13 cent reduction, which is not much. I mean, it's not much.
And they limited the growth of property taxes. Is that sort of the key thing that they did?
That's the most significant thing, and that's been worked on last session. They worked on it, we couldn't get it done. This session, it did get done. It's a little bit higher than the governor's originally planned a proposal, which was 2.5% limit. And so it's at 3.5% for cities and counties and 2.5% for school districts, which is quite significant, except there is a lot of leeway in there. It's always got to read between the lines on these bills, who gets exempted. And a lot of cities are going to be exempted from it because they don't have revenue above 10 million a year or 15 million a year. And special districts are exempted and hospital districts and community colleges. So unfortunately,
even so, the state and local and county governments really pushed back on this, didn't they?
Absolutely, they did. Absolutely, and they can exceed the 3.5% cap. They just got to go to the voters and get it approved.
Which makes perfect sense in a democracy. If you're going to have a huge tax increase, you ought to be able to go to the voters and make sure that they agree with that.
Absolutely, and it has to be done in the fall, and it's local control.
Let's talk about the religious freedom provision here, the Chick-fil-A bill. It was moving through, didn't know if it was going to make it. Seems like it did make it, and then it didn't make it, and then finally it looks like it's through, as I understand. So, what was the situation with that?
Well, that was when San Antonio specifically excluded Chick-fil-A from bidding on space in their airport to serve their food and have a franchise because the city council did not like their political beliefs or their religious beliefs, which were reflected in the same. And so the state legislature took that up and did get that done. It's pretty narrow religious liberty bill,
right.
But it's not as broad as it could be or should be.
This was a mystery to me because it's not that Chick-fil-A says we don't hire certain people because of their religious belief. It's just the owners of the family, still family-owned organization, as I understand it. They had made certain contributions and other things that they're fully free to do under our government, and San Antonio decided they wanted to target them for that. It was a mystery to me why this is something you want to even try to do. There are a lot of companies out there. I don't know what those companies stand for or who they give money for, and I don't really care.
Well, of course, and I agree with you, buddy, of course. But, that just shows how out of control our cities are. They're run by socialists. They're run by very liberal Democrats. And that's their bench. That's where the Democrats are getting all their candidates to run up office and statewide or to the legislature.
One of the things you did that was a huge success was identifying what was happening at what they called Dallas County schools. And that's you started looking at this, and this was the busing program for the Dallas schools, and you started thinking, what's going on there? Seems like there's a problem. Turns out there was looked like massive fraud there, and people are going to jail for that.
They are. This is actually one of the largest political corruption scandals in the history of the United States, and certainly the largest in the Dallas County area and the state of Texas. And really, right now we have 4 people, up to 5 people going to prison. And maybe they've admitted to stealing $4 to $5 million, but the real number is going to be in the tens of millions of dollars is how much was stolen. And it was stolen in a scheme with cameras on buses, on stop-arm buses, to take pictures of cars' license plates, and it was just a complete mess. This was a very old organization. It was. But they have stolen tens of millions of dollars from Dallas County taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. One of the things they did pass was on the red light cameras. As I understand it, they're beginning to phase those out. Contracts are in place right now, so they're not just canceling the contracts. They're going to phase them out after the contracts elapse. Where were you on that?
Oh, I was a big champion of getting red light cameras. That was one of my main focuses in both sessions I was in, and I just find them a real assault to our liberty. And it was a money-grabbing scheme by camera companies. The same thing that happened in Dallas County schools. These big multi-billion-dollar cameras companies go out and convince these cities to erect the cameras and split the revenue. and it's just a big problem. It actually isn't about safety. It was increasing rear-end accidents. And I am very, very excited. That's my favorite bill to get that the members got done this session, is to get rid of those, and it's far past time that happened.
They passed something to defund abortion providers. It says on the Texas Tribune piece, this measure would prohibit state and local governments from partnering with agencies that perform abortions, even if they contract for services not related to the procedure. Now, there's a whole lot of abortion issues moving around the states right now. We didn't do a very large one. We just did a little one, but it seems like they made some progress on that area.
Well, it a little bit, but it's really disappointing. It very much. I'm solid pro-life. I believe in from conception to natural death. And let me tell you that Texas should be a leader in the pro-life movement across the United States of America, and we're not.
No.
We Republicans dominate our legislature. We in the state house there's 150 members, 83 Republicans now, and 67 Democrats, and so in the Senate there's 31 members, and there's 19 Republicans and 12 Democrats. So there's no reason, inexcusable, that we shouldn't be a leader in the nation on pro-life legislation, and we're not.
You were there 4 years. What in 2 different sessions?
Mm-hmm.
What happened? Why could they not move something through?
I think it's they're scared about the litigation. They're just not brave. And what happens is leadership takes over, and in our state house particularly, we've got a like you said earlier at the very beginning of the show, a kumbaya attitude, and that we need to make sure the Democrats are happy. So their Speaker of the House that runs it puts many Democrats in charge of committees. And they basically run the House as a liberal organization, a liberal chamber, and the Republican Party platform just falls to the side. The Senate's a little more conservative, a little more definitive on being that way, but with three of the main conservatives not being there this session, it definitely tilted to the left.
That's former State Senator Don Huffines. When we come back after the break, we're going to be joined by phone by former State Representative Ron Simmons to talk a little bit more about what's been happening in Texas. If you go to pointofview.net and click on today's show, we have on there a summary from the Texas Tribune of the various pieces of legislation that passed during the state legislature, some that are going to the governor's for a signature, others that failed. So you can see a summary of those things, and you can click on that and sort of see a broader explanation. There's a brief summary on there, and then a broader explanation if you want to find out more information. So we're going to continue talking about why Texas, one of the most conservative states in the country, seems to be doing some non-conservative things, both in its legislation and others. So stay with me, and we will be back in just a minute.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And with us in studio today, we've got former State Senator Don Huffines, as we're talking about issues around the Texas Legislature, which has just stepped out for this session. And on the phone with us, we have former State Rep Ron Simmons. Ron, are you with us?
I sure am. Hey, hello. Don and Murray, how you doing?
We're doing well, thank you. Ron is a son of two Arkansas public school teachers. He graduated from Dallas Baptist University, and he's the co-founder and former chairman of Retirement Advisors of America, which was a financial management firm, a large financial management firm. From 2013 to January 2019, Ron served as the state representative from House District 65 in Denton County. And he was also appointed by Governor Greg Abbott to be on the board of Texas Mutual Insurance Company. That's the largest provider of workers' compensation insurance. And Ron, Don and I have been talking about some of the hits and misses from the state legislature. I'll mention to our listeners that at pointofview.net, if you click on there, go to the show, you'll see a summary from the Texas Tribune of various bills that passed the legislature this year and some that failed. So, Ron, let's start out by what was your assessment of the legislature this year? We've been talking about it. It sort of seemed like a group hug. Everybody said, this is a great session. We all did great. Let's go home. What's your take on it?
Well, I think there's some truth to that, and I think that's pretty natural when the majorities have become smaller, and that there are more things that you have to collaborate on than you may have had to in the past when you had 95 Republicans, and when the Democrats were going through this too in the 80s and 90s, they went through the same thing. So I think there was some truth to that, but I know Speaker Bonin well enough to know, and his leadership team he put around him, that while that certainly was the way it was on the surface and the way it should have been, that the things that were important to the House and to their constituents, especially majority constituents, such as school finance reform, doing some stuff with Harvey, some property tax improvements and what have you, I know that those were going to get done no matter what. And the fact that he could do it in a way that at least publicly was pleasant was a positive.
Were you surprised at the size of the spending that legislation that passed, because it did go up significantly for the next 2-year period?
Yeah, and I think I was surprised at that a little. Well, I say surprised. It was shocking how much it could go up, just given the revenue that was available. Mm-hmm. I think what we have to do, and I haven't done this, by the way, and I'm going to do it myself, is I think what we have to do is we have to go in, we have to carve out, just for our analysis purposes, money that was spent on schools and things that are related to that, and then say what did the rest of the budget rise by, and I think we need to compare that as a more accurate comparison, because I do think some of this school money that was put in there is something that they knew they had extra revenue. They were getting tremendous pressure to make some changes in that particular arena, especially on recapture and things like that. And remember, the way the appropriation process works, that we have the $5 billion of property tax relief counts as spending, right? Mm-hmm. So while that's property tax relief for you and I, it also counts as a $5 billion increase in spending on the budget.
Well, as I understand it, they did not touch the rainy day fund, but they did go into savings by something like $6 or $6.5 billion. Is that correct?
Yeah, and they did touch the rainy day fund. I don't know exactly how much it was, but what's happened with the rainy day fund now is that they have had. They set a minimum balance that it cannot go below, and so they certainly didn't go below that. In fact, they're still going to have almost $10 billion left in there here by the time their spending is over. But they did go into that for some one-time expenses related to Hurricane Harvey, which that is exactly what the rainy day fund was set up for. We can disagree with a lot of other maybe way they spent money on expenses, but the rainy day fund was set up just for that, and that was a rainy day where we had these one-time, not planned for expenses that we needed to contribute to.
Now, in the first half hour, Don and I talked a good bit about some of the missed opportunities. Did you see a major missed opportunity in there?
Well, I think if there was a major missed opportunity, and listen, there's always many more bills that are filed than can be passed. The one for me personally, this is more of a personal thing, is the heartbeat bill. I realize that Planned Parenthoods of the world would have gone out and found a Obama-appointed judge to overturn it, but it would have also given us the opportunity to get it to the Fifth Circuit and also potentially get it to the Supreme Court. So the heartbeat bill, I think, was really important for me. That didn't get done. The other thing that didn't get done that should be much more bipartisan is a solution, a long-term solution to be able to make major transportation road improvements on places like downtown Austin, to where it's a $9 billion number when you redo 35 from Georgetown to San Marcos. And the district in Austin, the transportation district here, they're never allocated $9 billion at one time. So how do you fix that? And I thought we had an opportunity to think outside the box and get that fixed with some potential public-private partnership stuff, and they just simply did not get it done.
And so you would give it something like what kind of grade would you give the legislature?
Well, I would, and I hate scorecards, okay, but I would say that the legislature did exactly what they needed to do in a session to where they had to handle the school finance, and in a session where the majorities have shrunk, and looking at 2020 where you have to protect your members. The majority needs to protect its members and not give the other side an opportunity or wedge issues to go after them on. And I think Governor Patrick and Governor Abbott and Speaker Bonin did a really good job at that. Although in an ideal world, maybe you and I would have done, and Don would have done something, some things differently. I think they did what they had to do in 2018, 2019.
They avoided some of the issues. There wasn't a bathroom bill in this state legislature, so they seemed to avoid some of the more contentious issues. But there was the Chick-fil-A bill that looks to be going to the governor's desk now. Did you have any input on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have lots of friends in there and talked about that in my conversations with my colleagues, and I think what I got, the feedback I got was that was just where the Democrats went a bridge too far. Okay, in other words, that was a bill that wasn't. They tried to make it into a bill that had something to do with LGBTQ discrimination, which just was not the case at all. It was about protecting individual constitutional rights of religious freedom, and I was very proud of them for making that happen, and for the Senate really pushing it through after it had some stallings in the House at first. I was really proud of them for that. On the other hand, I was also disappointed in that we couldn't get a bill done that would have done away with the city's right to force people to force businesses to provide paid sick leave. I just don't think that's something that cities or municipalities or state governments, for that matter, should be involved in. But we couldn't get that bill all the way through the legislature.
Don, were the churches important in the Chick-fil-A bill, and what's the role of churches out there in responding to the legislature and some of the things that are going on?
Well, hello, Ron. This is Don Huffines here. Buddy, I can tell you that's the low-hanging fruit for the Republican Party next cycle. And we have got to get everyone out of the church pews, registered to vote, and we got to get them out there and voting for the God-fearing candidates that are out there, and they need to do their homework. I mean, The last cycle, we had about a 9 to 10% less turnout for those that considered themselves Christians, and then we also lost their vote about 5 to 6 points more than we normally would, and that was a difference statewide in several 100,000 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's critically important that everyone that values God and knows that this country was created and divinely created by God, and that the Democrats are really out there to replace God with government.
Joining me right now is, former Senator Don Huffines and former State Rep Ron Simmons. And we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about what's going on in the Texas Legislature and their achievements and missed opportunities. Stay with us, and we'll be back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And with me in studio, former Texas State Senator Don Huffines. And on the phone, we've got former State Rep Ron Simmons. Don?
Oh, thank you, buddy. Hey, Ron, I was wondering, what do you think is going to be in store for Dallas County and the state of Texas, and for the nation, for that matter, in the next election cycle in 2020? Do you have any good advice out there?
Well, I think that you hit on something just before the break that's really, really important for Texas and really for all over the country, is for those of us that are liberty-minded, small government people of faith, whatever faith you have, if you believe faith plays an important role in your day-to-day life, more so than the government should play a role in your life, then we have to get those people outside of their comfort zone and vote. And we also have to remember, Don, I think my advice to people is that, politics is never, ever perfect. And there's a lot about it that you and I
that
both
may be
know.
an understatement.
Yeah, that we don't like and is unpleasant. But here's what I think. I think in 2018 that there was a wake-up call in Texas for Republicans, and I think we're going to have a Republican turnout like you have never seen before, up and down the ticket. And the fact that we got rid of one-punch voting, so that people have to go down and evaluate every single candidate, I believe that's going to yield much better elected officials. And in my opinion, those will be Republican elected officials.
Ron, back in the 1990s, when I would go to Washington frequently, I'd sit down with members of the House or something like that, and usually conservative Republicans. And when we would talk about a specific piece of legislation or something, one of the first things they would say is, where is the Christian coalition on this? Because they did not want to go against the Christian coalition. And so if you were going to go talk to them about legislation, you had to go talk to Ralph Reed or somebody there to find out where they were on something before you went and talked, because the legislator, the member of Congress, didn't want to go against them. They wanted to, if the Christian coalition was okay, they were okay with it. But, the Christian coalition is just not the force it used to be, and I'm not sure that anybody's ever really picked up and taken that place yet.
No, I think you're right. I don't think that has happened yet on a national level. The moral majority that Jerry Falwell did, Christian Coalition that Ralph Reed knows, we have not done as good a job of that, and that's a very good point. That's something that we really need to figure out how can we have a national influence that requires politicians and policymakers to seek out what we believe, those of us that are people of faith believe, before they pass a bill. That's a good point. And I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. One of the things that's happened in Texas, and I think Don would agree with this, is while we have some very loud voices that spend quite a bit of time cannibalizing the Republican Party. And while 90-something% of the policies I would agree with people like this on, they actually end up doing more damage than they do good. You have to follow the Ronald Reagan approach. You have to never sacrifice your values, but you also have to understand that in politics and in public policy, nothing is perfect, and you have to get the very best that you can get and try to continually improve on that. And we're doing just like the Democrat Party did in the 80s and 90s, and that they're eating their young, right? They're eating their own selves. And we have got to stop doing that. And I'm continue to be disappointed in how we do that.
It's a very good point, because from my standpoint, if an elected official agrees with me, votes with the way I think they should, say 80% of the time or something, I'm fine with that. But we do have voices out there that feel like if you take one bad vote, then now you're my enemy, and I'm going to try to work to get you primaried and get you out. And in some cases, it just has not worked very well. In the last election, you had a lot of millennials turning out in Texas voting blue. Do you see this as a trend, or do you think was that an anomaly?
Well, I think the fact that a lot of them in Texas came out to vote larger than normal was a little bit of an anomaly. All right, I think that the fact that they are voting blue is not an anomaly, and it's something that we're going to have to turn around. My daughter, Allie Beth Stuckey, is really engaged in millennial issues. In fact, she has a podcast and a blog. She's on Fox and other places quite a bit, talking about being a conservative millennial. We have got a huge education program to do. In fact, next week in Dallas, actually, at the Omni Hotel in Dallas, they're having a huge conference that Charlie Kirk's group And that organization is putting on a young women's leadership conference that Allie Beth's kind of heading up, and it's really encouraging because it's going to bring several hundred, if not over 1,000 young women, conservative women, to come learn about how to be more effective in their communities. And so I think there's positive signs out there, but it's an uphill battle for us, no question about it.
So the good news on that is that it is conservative women, because we keep hearing from the Democratic Party that Republicans and conservatives are engaged in a war on women.
Yeah, absolutely not true. And you and I both know that. In fact, what we're trying to do is to keep them from killing over 25 million babies that they have done in the last since Roe v. Wade. 50 million total, 25, if you assume half of those were girls, 25 million little girls were killed through something called pro-choice. But you and I both know it's nothing more than murder, in my opinion, anyway.
Hey, Ron, this is Don again, and I just want to say I completely agree with you, and congratulations to your daughter on helping spread the real truth. But people like Ben Shapiro are out there. We have got a great movement in the youth right now to understand conservative principles, our true purpose in our country and our Constitution, and I'm very optimistic. I mean, you look around the world right now and look what's happened in Australia to England, et cetera, and all the way around. And it is about conservative principles and ideas and pushing back on the socialists and the communists.
Well, you're right about that, Don. So I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the most interesting things I read this week was how the elections occurred in all those different countries in Europe. And yes, there were some that went far left. We get that. But there were a lot more that are doing just what you said and grabbing hold of the principles that the three of us know to be what's made America and what's made a lot of other countries great as well.
Ron, and take about 30 seconds to encourage the listeners to get engaged here, because that's one of the key aspects you're trying to highlight.
Well, thank you very much, Merrill. I appreciate that. And I would just want to encourage everybody. It doesn't do you. I did this for years, okay, and I'm proof that it doesn't do you any good to yell at your television, right? Or to just walk away in disgust and stuff like that and throw your hands up. What we have to do is you have to get engaged on the local level. The best way for people to get engaged is get engaged. Every county has a Republican Party, okay, if you're a conservative. Okay, if you're a Democrat, there's a Democrat Party. They have an organization there, and it's made up of precinct chairs, which is basically neighborhood leaders. If you haven't done this, the simplest way to take the first step, in addition to voting, is becoming a precinct chair or an assistant precinct chair and helping out at the ground level. That's where these races are won.
Thank you so much. That's former State Rep Ron Simmons. In with me in the studio has been former State Senator Don Huffines. When we come back, we're going to be talking about voting fraud with one of the country's top experts on voting fraud. Stay with us.
It wasn't long ago it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And in the studio with me today is former Texas State Senator Don Huffines. And right now we're going to go to John Fund, who's on the phone with us, to talk about election fraud. John, are you there?
A pleasure. Thank you, Merrill.
John is the national affairs columnist for National Review and a contributor to Fox News. He was with the Wall Street Journal for 27 years, and I've known John now for probably 25 or 30 years. He is one of the country's top analysts and writers about election fraud and voting fraud. Back in 2012, he published Who's Counting? How Fraudsters and Bureaucrats Put Your Vote at Risk. So, John, thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump right into the issue. Where are we on, there was a lot of discussion about voting fraud over the last few years. President Trump highlighted it, created a special little committee to look into that. But it's been kind of quiet here lately. What's happening on the voter fraud area?
Well, the first thing to understand about voter fraud is it's part of a broader problem of our sloppy elections. We probably don't spend enough money on the election machinery. We certainly don't have laws that are tight enough or enforced enough to make sure that every person's vote counts. And the reason why this is important is, all of your listeners have two civil rights when it comes to voting. There's the first civil right, which is to make sure that you can vote without fear or pressure. There's no poll tax literacy test like there was in the Jim Crow South. We fought a civil rights struggle in the 60s to make sure that didn't happen. But all of your listeners have a second civil right, which is not to have their vote canceled out, voided by someone who is voting twice, someone who's a non-citizen, someone who's moved out of state, someone who's dead, someone who doesn't exist. Both civil rights are important, and the accusation that there is no voter fraud goes against all of American history, which is replete with examples of voter fraud. Look, you're in Texas. Just a few months ago, 4 women were arrested as part of a voter fraud ring in Fort Worth. Mm-hmm. And the person who apparently paid them was the former chair of the Democratic Party of Fort Worth. And what they were doing is they were literally stealing absentee ballots from people's mailboxes.
Yes.
And also going door to door and helping elderly voters fill out their ballot with, shall we say, assistance. And they've been indicted. And Texas has many, many cases like this. Other states do as well. And I think it boils my blood to hear people say there is no voter fraud when we really have a problem in some states that verges on an epidemic.
So address this issue. There's a group of us that say there is voter fraud out there. It's obvious. You actually see cases being prosecuted. The other side tends to say any effort to do that, any effort to try to clean up the voter rolls or address that issue is tantamount to voter suppression. And you heard that from Stacey Abrams in Georgia. What's the status of the voter suppression? Is there really voter suppression going on?
Well, we have data for that, which is if there's voter suppression, boy, has it failed. Georgia has had the longest voter ID laws in the country. They've been around for a dozen years now. They were sanctioned by the Supreme Court in a decision written by John Paul Stevens, who was the most liberal justice at the time. And Georgia, Indiana, other states have seen explosion in minority voter turnout, especially in the last election. And the allegations by Stacey Abrams there was voter suppression. She never brought any real people with real names forward to claim that. It's easy to claim voter suppression. What she said is 49,000 registrations were not immediately processed and put on the voter rolls, and that was voter suppression. Well, it turned out those forms had been filled in improperly. They were lacking relevant addresses, social security number, signatures, whatever. And guess who had created the groups that filed those fake or incomplete registrations? Stacey Abrams. She was complaining about the registrations that her own groups had submitted.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212, if you'd like to call and talk a little bit about voter fraud and its presence or non-presence around the country. So, John, we've got that issue. What will come up from some people is to say, yes, there is some voter fraud, but it's very, very small. It's very few numbers, and they can't affect an election because the numbers are so small.
Well, let me give you some examples. Florida 2000, the presidential race was decided in that one state by 531 votes. There were all kinds of problems. There were double ballots, missing ballots, felons voting, all kinds of problems in that state, and that decided the presidency. 2008, Al Franken was elected senator by 312 votes in Minnesota after 6 months of court cases. After he was sworn in, it was found there was documented proof that 1,200 felons who didn't have the right to vote voted anyway, and when a TV station interviewed a sample of them, 9 out of 10 said they voted for Franken. That was clear voter fraud. It clearly swung the election, and it made a difference because the Democrats, with Franken's being seated, had 60 votes to pass Obamacare without a filibuster, and they passed Obamacare, and the history of American health care, which you're very involved with, Merrill, has never been the same. Because if they hadn't had the 60 votes, we would have passed a far different health care bill or not at all.
John, we only have a couple of minutes left. Take about 1 minute to explain what we should be doing. How do we fix this problem?
3 things. 1, we have to get over the fact that anytime we talk about this issue, the opponents are going to scream racism. Well, it's not racist, and, minorities are often the people most hurt by voter fraud because they live in inner cities where it's most prevalent, and that's where machines literally crush reform candidates. Secondly, clean up absentee ballots. Any ballot that's cast outside of a polling place can be manipulated, stolen, interfered with. And lastly, let's do both. Let's make sure people have the right to vote and make it easy to vote, but also make it hard to cheat. Let's have a bipartisan compromise like they had with the Help America Vote Act after the Florida recount in 2000. We can do both. We can make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. We're Americans. This is not rocket science. This is our election system, and every party has an interest in making sure this is free, fair, and not disputed by the other side.
Well, I'm convinced. If you want to know more about John Fund, go to pointofview.net and go to the show today, and we have his bio up there and information about him. He also was the author of a book, Who's Counting? How Fraudsters and Bureaucrats Put Your Vote at Risk. I recommend that book to you. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about voting fraud and some things that could be done in Texas with former State Senator Don Huffines. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Stay with us, and we'll come back and continue our discussion about voting fraud.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
29 years ago, Alan Bloom wrote the book The Closing of the American Mind. Last week, Charles Koch wrote an op-ed with the same title. There are some similarities between the two, but also one important difference. Charles Koch looks back at the revolutionary technological advances we have made and now take for granted. He is concerned that government and the academy are stifling progress. When he attended MIT, he discovered that scientific and technological progress requires the free and open exchange of ideas. The same holds true for moral and social progress. In America, we used to believe that progress comes from the free exchange of ideas and from challenging other people's views and hypotheses. The spontaneous process of collaboration and challenge led to the technological advances we have today. Charles Koch is concerned that the U.S. is already far down the path to becoming a less open and free society, and the current cultural and political atmosphere threatens to make the situation worse. In previous commentaries, I've talked about how political correctness and bias against contrary views are transforming the colleges and universities. Charles Koch laments that education in America, and particularly in higher education, has become increasingly hostile to the free exchange of ideas. On many campuses, a climate of intellectual conformity has replaced open debate and inquiry, stifling discussion on a host of topics ranging from history to science to economics. Many liberals and progressives may dislike the Koch brothers, but I certainly hope that they would agree with his diagnosis. Nearly 3 decades ago, Alan Bloom wrote about how higher education failed democracy and impoverished the souls of today's students. Charles Koch now sees how the intellectual conformity on the campus and in government stifles innovation. This is the legacy of closed minds. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Welcome back to Point of View. And with me in studio, former State Senator Don Huffines. And we just got off the phone with John Fund, who is an expert on election fraud. And I'll just highlight a few resources for you. The Heritage Foundation has a website. They've been tracking election fraud for some time, and they want to highlight those instances. So you can go to pointofview.net, click on today's show, and we have a link up there to the Heritage Foundation and some of the information that's there. But there's actually 2 sites on the Heritage Foundation. The numbers are a little bit different, but on the one we have a link to, they have 1,088 proven instances of voter fraud. They have 949 criminal convictions, 48 civil penalties, 75 diversion programs, and then some judicial findings and official findings. But over 1,000. They have another number up there on a different part of the site that has, I think, about 1,199, so about 100 more or so. But these are proven instances of voter fraud. So you can go to pointofview.net, click on that, and you'll be able to look at some of those instances. And as John mentioned, Don, we were looking I was looking in the paper, I think it was last week, and found that there was a series of voter fraud, I guess convictions here, about 4 arrests of 4 women who were involved in this, and they were doing mail-in ballots. They were going by, getting these mail-in ballots, filling them out and mailing them in, and then people come up and find later and say, well, I don't think I ever mailed that in. Well, lo and behold, you apparently voted, because we've got that on record. So there are some things. There was, the Medrano family has been a famous political family in Texas, and there a few years back, I still remember seeing on the Dallas Morning News an article up there about how voter fraud doesn't happen, and then down here on the same front page, one of the Medranos being convicted of voter fraud. It was very interesting. You had to work to try to get that in your head, where you have both the article, there is no voter fraud, and a man being convicted in Texas of voter fraud. But you've been tracking this yourself.
I certainly have, buddy, and it's a big issue, not only in the state of Texas, but nationwide. And there's a lot. This is a nonpartisan issue. And it certainly should be a nonpartisan issue.
It tends to be a partisan issue, but it should be a nonpartisan issue.
It certainly should. I mean, it's just common sense that one of the biggest attributes of being an American citizen is being able to vote and not having your vote, your ballot canceled out. And, there's many shapes and sizes of voter fraud, and I've got several examples right here. I've got a letter from the Dallas County Elections Administrator, and then from 1999 to 2007, 1,889 non-citizens were registered to vote in Dallas County. And they only vet these guys when they come in for jury duty. And these are people that self-report themselves. And since 11 to 17, there's been another couple of hundred. And of those, 356 had voted in Dallas County, and some had voted over 30 different times, and those are non-citizens. And I'm always very concerned about software manipulation, particularly where there's no paper ballot trail.
1-800-351-1212. If you want to talk about voter fraud, just give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We probably should say that just because an illegal immigrant is registered to vote doesn't necessarily mean malicious intent, I guess. That things can happen sometimes where they get registered and they may not know it or something like that. So it's not always clear that they're out to defraud the system, though some apparently are.
Well, it's still illegal.
Right.
It's against the law to register to vote if you're a non-citizen in the state of Texas, and that's a misdemeanor. If you vote, it's a felony, and you're non-citizen. And we have very little, if any, prosecution on these crimes. And these are very real crimes, and they don't seem very difficult to me to prove.
Now, Texas was looking at passing some legislation, but that didn't get through. What were they trying to do with that?
Well, that was one of the big disappointments in this session, in my opinion, and that was Senate Bill 9, and that was carried by Brian Hughes, senator from East Texas. And it had just some great things in there about how to make our elections more accountable, election administrators more accountable. It called for paper ballots. It called for auditing. It called they had in there to limit rolling polling in Texas. You can roll a polling booth around the district and gather up votes. It's going to benefit your side, one side or the other. And it was just it was a great accounting bill. It increased the penalties for voter fraud, particularly mail-in voter fraud, which is always ripe for abuse.
So do we have a general sense? I mean, Attorney General Paxton has come out and stated, I think he highlighted something like 90-something cases, of which I think 33 went on to be prosecuted. And some of the papers were saying, well, see, it's not actually that many because some of these were just sort of minor infractions. It might have been a person who claimed they didn't know they weren't allowed to vote or something of that nature. Are we talking about numbers large enough to actually create a problem?
Well, absolutely we are. Of course, there are many elections decided with very few votes, under 100 votes. There was even an election out here outside of Dallas that was decided by one vote. And so, to me, it's against the law. This is very simple. It's not complicated. Either you're a citizen or you're not. And I find it hard to believe that people don't know if they're a citizen in this country. I really find that humorous. And it's against the law to register to vote if you're a non-citizen. And so just because they registered to vote and they didn't know that was the law, you cannot use that excuse if you're robbing the bank or you're driving drunk. Well, I didn't know you couldn't drive your car drunk. Well, that judge doesn't care about that. You're still going to jail.
There is a discussion, and a man in Fort Worth has been looking into this, and he lost an election. And it was a local election, I believe, and he went and looked and said, there's some problems here. And he came out with some summaries. He said, the bigger impact of voter fraud tends to be on local elections rather than national elections tend to be an off time. So not so much in November. It's when they do sort of, we've got in Dallas, we've got the mayor's election coming up here. I think it's early voting is going on right now. But his point was if it's a smaller election, off times, and it allows people, there's less attention being paid to it, and allows people to do registration of votes and false registration of votes, mail-in ballots, and so forth. It's easier to be able to affect an election when it's small and off time periods.
Well, it certainly could have a bigger effect on the election when there's less voters, but not to understate how important it is in every election to make sure every proper ballot is counted correctly. And I think one of the biggest areas that this is a big area. There are thousands of people in the state of Texas voting that should not be voting. These are people that are illegal. They do not have citizenship. I've got the proof right here. Just in Dallas County in the last 15 years, over 2,000 people have voted that should not have voted. And look, the illegal issue in the state of Texas is massive. The state of Texas has been burdened way beyond what we should be burdened on having to deal with this issue. We have thousands and tens of thousands of people crossing that border every day, every week that aren't supposed to be here. Then the state of Texas is burdened in educating them. We spend approximately $4 to $5 billion a year educating children that are illegal, that aren't even supposed to be here, that their parents smuggled into this country, and now the state of Texas is saddled with that cost.
And that's because of a Supreme Court decision that says if they're here, they get free education.
That's correct. That was the Pilar case in 1981. It was actually a Texas case. It was very controversial, and it was ruled 5-4. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that they were entitled to an education, but it never said who had to pay for it. And unfortunately, Texans are stuck paying for the bulk of this, and almost all of it. The state of Texas doesn't reimburse Texas for anything related to non-citizens having to be educated in this state. The state of Texas spends over $1 million a day, every day, trying to enhance border security. And most people don't realize that state troopers cannot arrest anyone that's here illegally. Mm-hmm. And neither can the National Guard. We have National Guard down there. We're spending millions of dollars on those guys, and they can't arrest anyone for immigration violations either.
Several years ago, I was talking to a person who used to work in the George Herbert Walker Bush administration at the Department of Health and Human Services, came back and was working in Dallas. And she told me, she said that one of the hospitals close to the border in Texas had the security people's uniforms changed to look a little bit more like border control. She said it wasn't exactly like border control, but it looked a little more like border control, so similar to border control, and that the hospital got a cease and desist order from the Bush administration, I believe it was, or maybe it was Clinton administration by then, but Clinton administration saying this is you have to go back to the other uniforms because we don't want people coming across to have babies in Texas coming across illegally, being scared away because they think the hospital security is actually border control.
Right. Well, I can tell you border security is huge. We are being overrun in the state of Texas. We have no control over our border down there, and it's past time for the federal government to do something.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. If you want to talk about election fraud, immigration, and other issues, we've got the lines open. Give us a call, and we'll be back in just a minute.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90 Bible.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and with me in studio today, former Texas Senator Don Huffines. And we've been talking about voter fraud and immigration. If you want to express your point of view, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. And we've got some callers on the line, Don. So let's go to Brian in South Carolina. Brian, you're on the air. What's your point of view?
Thank you for taking my call. I want to know how to pursue, prosecution, or how to pursue making things right where there's obvious voter fraud. In my district, I've gone to the voter registrar as a volunteer registrar myself, and asked if I could have permission to take a computer chip or flash drive with the voter roll on it to the state Department of Vital Statistics to run it against their death list. And he looked at me as if to say, "You in whose army?" The problem being that I could report it to the Republican Party, but the Republican Party is handcuffed by the consent decree that was signed 30 or 40 years ago. I think it was in district court in New Jersey where the Republican Party was made to agree not to pursue any malfeasance by the Democrats.
So your question is, how do you pursue the voter fraud issue? Is that right?
Where you see something that is obviously wrong. How do you go about it? I'm not rich, or I'm not a lawyer, and they more or less shrug me off.
It's a good question. What should Brian do if you see, Don, if you see something happening there? What should we do?
Every state's going to be a little bit different, of course. These are all state laws related to election security and what you can and cannot do. In South Carolina, I'm not familiar with the laws there, but I would suggest talking to your members of your legislature and of course bringing it to their attention. Unfortunately, this is like the electric fence. I mean, the Republican Party doesn't like dealing with it. In the state of Texas, I've seen it where we know we can drill down and we know who's voting illegally. We know where the mistakes they're making and violating the law, and yet we can't get anyone to prosecute it. So it's a very frustrating, extremely frustrating process.
And so Brian, you've seen some of these instances yourself. Is that correct?
I have seen I have attempted to correct some of the voting rolls, having seen as a poll volunteer and having worked as a volunteer registrant and seen how easy it is to just put somebody's name on it and a phony address and just create voters out of thin air.
You know, Brian, I've talked to poll watchers before, and they come up with some I don't know if you said terrible stories, harrowing stories. I mean, they oftentimes tell me of some serious problems that have occurred while they're watching it, and in many cases, especially if in certain communities, they have a great deal of difficulty actually getting anything done or addressing those problems.
And Merrill, you're right. I mean, it's very difficult. And what we're scared of, or I think the politicians are scared of, is voter suppression. They don't want to be accused of suppressing the voters and being negative about that. But it's really interesting. They pick on the Republican Party for that because the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln. The Republicans are the ones that voted for the Civil Rights Movement. The Democrats are the party of the KKK. They're the party of the poll tax. They're the party of intimidation and voter suppression historically for hundred years and decades. So it's time that people woke up to the fact that the Republicans are about having fair and honest elections.
Well, thank you, Brian, so much for calling, and let's go to Olympia. I'm trying to go to Olympia. It's not opening up. So Olympia is in Georgia, and maybe we'll get out. There she is. Olympia, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you for joining us. What's your point of view?
So it's very frustrating. It seems like daily we are more impotent. This is supposed to be a government of, for, and by the people. They're both corrupt, both the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats to the nth degree anymore. But look at France, look at other places. We've become so comfortable with asking somebody else to do it for us. It's time for us to do it for ourselves. We have Texas, and every state has its own constitution, and the citizens of each state have their rights. You know, the federal government is burdened with sex trafficking and, you know, disproving all the crap the Obama administration brought with it. We've got to wake up and do something. You can't just kick the bucket to some other guy who's got his plate already full.
Olympia, you're in Georgia. During the governor's election there in the last section, did you were you concerned that there was voter suppression by the I guess he was Secretary of State at the time, but Stacey Abrams' accusation that there was voter suppression?
No, she was absolutely wrong. There were voter suppression, quote unquote, was not allowing illegals to vote, or not allowing, you know, multiple voting like we've seen from Project Veritas and other citizen reporters. There's no voter suppression.
Don?
These people are corrupt politicians.
Well,
the stories get spun on, you know, the mainstream media. And
so I totally agree. I mean, right now, you've got both parties are not doing anything about our election integrity and our securing our ballots. And it should be a nonpartisan issue. It's a fundamental right we have as citizens of this country is to make sure that our votes count, don't get canceled out.
You know, it's you've mentioned this, Don. This is generally a state issue as opposed to a federal issue. Is there a role for the federal government to step in on this and address it, do you think, or should it just remain a state issue?
Well, that's a very good question, Merrill. I think there is a role for the federal government because they certainly have they certainly need to know that the federal elections are being held correctly, and a lot of it is a money issue. Mm-hmm. In Texas, we have 254 counties, and every county is responsible for their own election equipment. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you change out equipment, that's millions and millions of dollars, and so the federal government can budget and should fund for modern equipment for all these counties and around the nation, and that's going to be a lot of money. It'll be several $100 million. But we need paper trails. We don't need voting machines that don't have paper trails and paper ballots that follow them.
What was the Texas Legislature? What was the provisions in there in the bill that failed? What were they? They were going to try to address several of these things, I think, weren't they?
Yeah, one of the main things they were going to address is to make sure that they would cross-reference the voter registration names with citizenship. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we're losing. We're getting the most fraud right now. And that's a simple change that we're going to get Department of Public Safety to cross-reference.
Isn't that what the Secretary of State, I guess it was acting Secretary of State, Whiteley, was trying to do, and then it just completely botched it seemed like?
Yeah, that didn't work out too good. I think that obviously the lists weren't accurate. They weren't correct. But this is America. It isn't that hard. If you've got a driver's license, you're an American citizen. It's easy to check it. And if you're registered to vote and you don't, then you shouldn't be registered to vote and you violated the law.
This is amazing to me. And Newt Gingrich used to talk about this. I can go to the other side of the world and take my ATM card or something, and I can verify who I am, and I can get money, and it's easy. But somehow or other, we can't seem to get a process set up where they can verify who I am, and then I can vote, and it's all done, and it's easy, and you sort of minimize the fraud. But we can't seem to do that.
I know. One would wonder. And the other funny thing about it is that once you do it, we've got your name, right? Yeah. It's not like you can go hide. We got an ID for you. Now, the ID might be fake. There's a lot of people out there getting fake birth certificates, fake driver's license, and that gives them an opportunity to register to vote too. But we can bet that out if we had the will to do it. Right now, there's just no will to do it.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212 if you want to talk about election fraud and immigration. And speaking of that, Don, we've only got a few seconds left in this, but when they go out and they do a raid and you've got people who have been working and they're here illegally, they've been working for a company, the media sort of makes a case this is a sort of a victim, but in fact they're probably using fake IDs and fake defrauding Social Security and other things because they're using fake IDs to get this done. If the company feels like it vetted the person, they've probably used a fake ID. So I'm going to get Don's comment on that when we get back. 1-800-351-1212 if you want to give us a call, and we will be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and with me in studio, former Texas State Senator Don Huffines. And we've got a caller on the air. Let's go to Carol in Louisiana. She's got a comment about voter suppression. Carol, what's your point of view?
Well, I just wanted to make the statement that I'm listening to the station and I hear all this, and I just listened to what the young lady in Georgia said about she didn't agree that there was voter suppression. And voter suppression means that they're the voters are unable to get to the voter stations. And from what I saw, the documentations on the TV that they showed that the voting polls had been removed from the place where they were. A lot of people are poor, don't have proper transportation to get to and from where they have to go. And that, to me, is a sign of suppression. And I just like being fair. This is a religious station, and we all talk about knowing God and loving God, and that means we need to be fair and understand that there is wrongdoing in the Republican and the Democratic part of this government. And we need to look at the whole thing and open our spiritual eyes and see these things so that they all can be properly addressed. But there is voter suppression when voters cannot get to the polls, and the polls are being moved to areas where they cannot get to them, as opposed to moving to places where they can have access to them, because it is our right to have an opportunity to vote.
Carol, it's a good point, because when you talk about voter suppression, it can have a very wide definition. So in one case, whether or not if you have certain elements that sort of limit a person, say a person with a disability, and the person gets to the poll and can't get into the voting machines or something of that nature, that could be a sort of indirect, or let's say passive, form of voter suppression. And some of the people I know have suggested we need to have online voting so that people who have disabilities and really cannot get out of the house. Now, you can do mail-in ballots, so you have ways of doing that. But there is a push for online voting so that some people are able to, who can't get out of the house, or they're stuck at work and they can't get in, have the option of being able to vote in some way. But that always, when you do that, you always open up and create some other opportunities for fraud and problems if you do that. But as Don and I were talking about a minute ago, we can do this. We can go online. I can go into my online bank account and get money, make a deposit or something. I'm usually taking money out rather than putting money in. But we can do that. You'd think we could do this with voting, but we seem to have trouble. Don, any comments on Carol?
Well, Carol, there's no room and there should at all for voter suppression. I mean, there's nothing more horrible than that. And it just depends really on who's running your county, I believe. Your county election administrator, if they move the polling location, that should be the person you need to visit with on that. And this is a nonpartisan
there are times
issue.
when they've been moving some voting polls, sometimes at the last minute, as I understand it. Though I think other states may require that it has to be 30 or 60, 90 days before the election if you're going to move one. But sometimes you have just varying things. There's not a lot of people showing up at a certain poll, or you don't have enough people to staff it. There are some reasons why they may move polling locations, aren't there?
There are. And like I said, every state's going to be different. State laws are different across the nation, and even the counties could be different. Depends on who's running the county. But that is subtly voter suppression. It really is, and it shouldn't be happening. Like I keep saying, this is a nonpartisan issue. It's about making sure we have fair elections, and we have ballot certainty. And I would say, don't forget, you can vote absentee everywhere, and you can also do mail-in ballots, like Merrill said. And of course, all voters should have some sense of responsibility to make sure that they do what they need to do to get their vote, down to the polls and make their vote count.
Carol, thank you so much for calling. Don, every state has a advisory committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. Texas has an advisory committee. I'm vice chairman of the advisory committee. We published earlier this year findings of a survey we did, a sort of assessment last year. Here we had a hearing and we brought in some things, and a number of people highlighted what they thought was some forms of voter suppression. I would say in some cases it may just be government officials not doing the best job of making sure that you can, if you're stuck in a car because you have a major disability, being able to get people out to take the vote or doing something. They looked at a range of different things. These and then language barriers. There were some language barriers as well. But it does seem like in many cases people are trying to do the best job they can. But this is government. This is, I mean, if you have problems with the DMV and the lines and the inefficiency and things that are going on there, I don't want to be too critical of people who are involved in the voting process, but it is the government, and sometimes you can't get the resources, you can't get the people, you just can't do the things that we'd like to be able to do.
Oh, that's a very good point, Merrill. Absolutely. And a lot of these people might be volunteers or lightly paid staff people that just work part-time for the election. And so, and they're not as well trained as they should be. They might not know the rules and what they should be doing or not saying or doing. So, but I do put some of the responsibility back to the voter. The voters need to know what they're doing, where to vote, and how they're going to get there, and they make sure they're not intimidated in any form, shape, or manner.
We don't have a lot of time left, but let's go to Ben in Georgia. Ben, what's your point of view?
Yes, thank you for having me, Merrill. I love the show, and I just wanted to say that I'm a retired service member, and we talk about voter suppression, but during my 26-year career, I traveled 4 times a long distance. One time on deployment, I even took leave so that I would be able to vote in person instead of, even though I had the chance to do absentee ballot, but I wanted to make sure that my vote was counted that day. Also, we talk about voter suppression. I'm from the state of Georgia, and the numbers actually went up larger for the midterm election. So we talk about, voter suppression, but if someone wants to vote, I want to vote. My state is close by before I became a Georgia resident, but I would actually drive. I would take off from work, and I would travel, and I would let everybody know in advance, fill out the proper paperwork, and I would take that day off, give up a little bit of money, so I would have an opportunity to go and get a part of the experience also.
Ben, it is so important that because what you're pointing out is that you as a voter went to whatever means you had to do to make sure that your vote was there and counted. And I think many people sort of feel like they just ought to have it easy for them. I mean, they shouldn't have to go to any extra work. But if you need identification or other things, the states are trying to make those things available to people, but it seems like the responsibility falls on the individual to make sure that they're registered and able to vote.
Well, Merrill, one thing, that's another point. Thank you for bringing that up. I remember I was in Afghanistan in 2004 through 5. Afghanistan had its first ever election, parliamentary election. That November of 2004. And it was required in Afghanistan, which is a place that, is not Iraq. But the people had to have identification. Now, this is something that our leaders over here made us ensure as we were actual work polls for security, and also they had multinational forces that came out to ensure that there was no nefarious activities going on. But we had to ensure that everyone had identification before they voted in a country such as Afghanistan.
Thank you, Ben. Ben, we're running short of time, but thank you for that. I want to thank Senator Don Huffines for joining me. This has been a great discussion. We got more calls, but we're not going to be able to get to them. Thank you so much, Don, for joining me.
Thank you, Merrill, for having me. It's been a great afternoon.
When we come back, artificial intelligence and evangelicals. Stay with us.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And it's Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Welcome back to Point of View. And I have really been looking forward to this show because I find it so interesting. Our guest for this hour is Professor Joshua Swamidass. He is a associate professor of Laboratory and Genomic Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis, and has been involved in the issue of artificial intelligence for some time. Professor, are you with us?
Yeah, I got disconnected. Sorry, I'm here right now.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I ran across your piece in the Wall Street Journal, Evangelicals' take on artificial intelligence. We have, of course, for our listeners, we have your bio up on the Point of View website at pointofview.net, and I think we have a link to the article that you had in the Wall Street Journal. And I read through that, and I thought this is just fascinating stuff, because evangelicals are increasingly beginning to address this issue of, at least some evangelicals have, of artificial intelligence. So thank you so much for joining us. Let's start out by give us a definition of what artificial intelligence is.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me too. It's a real treat to be able to talk to you and your listeners. So there's really two types of artificial intelligence to be thinking about right now. We need to keep them separate because one of them's here now. It has a lot of ethical concerns that we need to deal with. Mm-hmm. And another one is really off more in science fiction. We don't even know if it'll ever come. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So the first type is artificial intelligence called machine learning, which is a technology that's been widely deployed, really making a big difference in economy and business and academia. And you can see that in the news all over the place. The key thing about this technology or this type of artificial intelligence is that it's mindless. It has no mind, like we have a mind. And that really gets to the artificial intelligence of maybe the future, which we see in science fiction all the time, where artificial intelligence is artificial persons or minds. That isn't really around yet. I don't think it's anywhere near now. And it may never happen either. But we just got to keep those two things separate.
Mm-hmm. So the mindless artificial intelligence. When we have, I think they're trying to develop artificial intelligence to do to sort of scan breast exams and things of that nature to help sort of review those things. That's what you're talking about, the sort of mindless artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's an example of a type of technology that's being developed. It's just a fancy computer program, a dance of numbers, as I call it in the article, where you can look at images really well, rivaling even a radiologist or human looking at images and pick out interesting things. So, for example, looking for breast cancer and a mammogram. The thing about that particular type of artificial intelligence is that we can't take that computer program and then have a conversation with it like we're having right now with each other, right?
Right. Now the point of your article in the Wall Street Journal, you were addressing the Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, and they had published something on artificial intelligence, an evangelical statement of principles. Now, we have a link to that on the Point of View website, so if you're interested, you can certainly go there and take a look at that statement of principles, and you sort of commend them, I think, for beginning to address this. But you don't. I think you had some concerns about it or questions about it.
Yeah, so first of all, it's a really good thing that theologians and evangelicals, I'm an evangelical myself, are engaging on this topic. It's important. It's going to affect us all. We need to have a societal conversation about that. It includes everyone. And I think there's also theological questions here, and there's questions for the church. So it's a really good thing that they're engaging. And I think we need to find more ways for that to happen. There were a couple things that I was hopeful or maybe disappointed about with that statement.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is that it's not really well described as an evangelical statement. This might make sense as an ELRC statement. The evangelical movement's really broad. It includes a larger number of people, and we just have to be careful about representing our own personal views as speaking for all of us, when that's not really what it is. I think it's pretty important because when, we can all have different points of view, and we need to have that conversation, but when we start speaking on behalf of other people, that can create a lot of confusion and also create situations where, maybe not the best steps towards understanding are happening as well.
A couple of things struck me about the statement, and as I said, we have that available to our listeners on the website. How many people signed off on this? I don't know most of them. I do know Dr. Richard Land, or at least I've talked to him in the past, but there are certainly a number of names from a wide range of institutions, some pastors, but some professors, others involved in various types of ethics issues and so forth. So there was a large number of people who signed off on it. But what I was...
There's about 70 or so.
Yeah, it's a large...
70.
I don't know how you get that many people to agree on anything. But the other thing, it was a very broad statement. I mean, there was not many specifics there. So it seemed just a very general statement. And maybe that's how you get everybody to sign off on it.
Yeah, maybe. The problem is that there were specifics in it that would be a problem, I think. And I don't actually know for sure if these were really well-considered policy statements they were making. But if we were to take this document seriously, it's not just sloppy language, but really what they meant, it would be a real problem for us right now. And in fact, I think it would really undermine what evangelicals really have to add to the conversation right now.
Mm-hmm. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to talk to Dr. Joshua Swamidass about the issue of artificial intelligence and what that means for us as evangelicals. Most of this, I think, we're looking at. There's not really an evangelical problem with things like the artificial intelligence we're talking about. If you're looking at if it's scanning breast exams and doing that thing, there's not much of an issue there for us, is there?
Well, I think there is. I mean,
okay.
One thing that we really care about is having a just society. That's good, and that does well for people of all sorts. One place where this is being used is not for breast cancer, but people have tried using this to sign sentences. Mm-hmm. For people when they're convicted of a crime, and we've also found that this can actually really lead to real big inequities between people under the guise of fairness. It's just because the algorithms really don't take the human factor into account.
I think there's also some concern about how the government might end up using this. So when we come back in a minute, we want to jump into that, whether the government can use this for photographs or for scanning faces and that type of thing. And does that raise some questions? And what kind of questions does it raise? So my guest, Dr. Joshua Swamidass, we're talking about artificial intelligence, his piece in the Wall Street Journal. 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to ask him a question. 1-800-351-1212. And we'll be back with you in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
29 years ago, Alan Bloom wrote the book The Closing of the American Mind. Last week, Charles Koch wrote an op-ed with the same title. There's some similarities between the two, but also one important difference. Charles Koch looks back at the revolutionary technological advances we have made and now take for granted. He is concerned that government and the academy are stifling progress. When he attended MIT, he discovered that scientific and technological progress requires the free and open exchange of ideas. The same holds true for moral and social progress. In America, we used to believe that progress comes from the free exchange of ideas and from challenging other people's views and hypotheses. The spontaneous process of collaboration and challenge led to the technological advances we have today. Charles Koch is concerned that the U.S. is already far down the path to becoming a less open and free society, and the current cultural and political atmosphere threatens to make the situation worse. In previous commentaries, I've talked about how political correctness and bias against contrary views are transforming the colleges and universities. Charles Koch laments that education in America, and particularly in higher education, has become increasingly hostile to the free exchange of ideas. On many campuses, a climate of intellectual conformity has replaced open debate and inquiry, stifling discussion on a host of topics ranging from history to science to economics. Many liberals and progressives may dislike the Koch brothers, but I certainly hope that they would agree with his diagnosis. Nearly 3 decades ago, Alan Bloom wrote about how higher education failed democracy and impoverished the souls of today's students. Charles Koch now sees how the intellectual conformity on the campus and in government stifles innovation. This is the legacy of closed minds. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Welcome back to Point of View. And my guest on the line, Dr. Joshua Swamidass. He is Associate Professor of Laboratory and Genomic Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. And we've been talking to him about an article he had in the Wall Street Journal on artificial intelligence and evangelicals. Doctor, you mentioned in there, you say that my team uses machine learning to understand how and why drugs become toxic, for example, to determine which kidneys can be safely transplanted and so forth. How does artificial intelligence work in those spheres?
And so artificial intelligence is really powerful because it gives us a way to go into areas where there's really complex information. So, for example, images of a kidney or chemical data, experiments collated from all over the place, and find patterns there in a way that might be really hard for a human to see patterns. And then moreover, when it does that, it can do it far more reproducibly than a human can. So, for example, the stuff we're doing kidney transplants, we're building computer programs that can help assess whether or not a kidney can be transplanted safely or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll give the same answer no matter if it's the first case we give it or the 1,000th case, and no matter what time of the day it is. On the other hand, a pathologist might get, beat, 3 a.m. in the morning, have half an hour to do it. They're going to give different results just from how tired they are and which case they're on, and that so on and so forth. So this gives a much more standardized, more careful, accurate measurement that can be used to really do things that can really benefit patients.
Well, explain how the machine learns from this. So does it scan through the kidneys? What is the machine learning from this so that it can make better decisions?
Yeah, so this is really where the hard work comes in. We have to find the right and appropriate data to use and the right way to fit it into a key decision in medicine. At least that's the area that I'm mainly working. And then what we do is we build a computer program that has the capacity to learn. That's why it's called artificial intelligence, too, because for a long time people were wondering if that was like a distinctly human trait, our ability to learn complex things. And so what we do then is we present that computer program with a lot of data that it learns from. And then we freeze it, and now that it's actually learned a lot of stuff, and we start applying it to basically tell us based on what it's learned, what's going on with new examples. Does that make sense?
Is the patient involved in this? Does the patient know that there is artificial intelligence going on with, say, the selection of the kidneys or what needs to be done there?
Well, right now, this hasn't come to market yet. Hopefully in a year or two we'll be there. And we think it's going to create a lot of benefits for patients, so we'd really love to know that we're doing it. Now, the more interesting case and why and what needs to be looked at more closely is the fact that the patients that we're using to train the model don't actually know about that. There's a whole bunch of reasons why, and this is also gets back to that statement and the notion of informed consent. Now, this is really important because it turns out that one of the reasons why questions about artificial intelligence arise is that it really makes data valuable. And you might have collected data for one reason. In this case, all of this data was collected to treat patients, right? Just in the normal course of healthcare. But then if we can actually take that data and do something else with it, other than the original reason for which it was collected, well, that could be really valuable. It can actually really help patients too. And so that's really how machine learning is changing how we think about data. And this is also why in science we're having a hard time with the notion of informed consent. Informed consent has never really been a very strong framework for ethics because I can get informed consent from someone and still do really unethical things with it that harm people, right?
Yes, you can.
And ultimately, the way how, at least I understand this as an evangelical, is that what makes someone good isn't their outward behavior and their ability to follow a whole bunch of rules and satisfy an IRB committee. It also comes out of out of my heart and what I'm intending to do in a very human sense, right?
Right.
And even if I'm allowed to do something, maybe I won't because it's not ethical. It's not right.
So
it's not virtuous.
You won't know this about me, but I spent 10 years at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center on their board, their institutional review board for human experimentation, and I was essentially the outside ethicist who they had to have, by law they had to have people who were not associated with the medical school there, and my chief task was going over the informed consent to ask the question: can the patient sort of understand what's going on here? Does the patient come away with a full understanding of it? Is it written in language that an average person can understand? And getting informed consent right is really tough. It's not easy because you don't always know who the patients are that are going to be seeing this material, how educated are they, and how difficult, how precise is the information here? Are you giving it too much information so their eyes glaze over? Are we anywhere near that with the informed consent on artificial intelligence?
Oh, I'd say we're very far from it, and this just isn't the right framework. So the fact of the matter is that when we collect data nowadays, and really any context that does not just medicine, we know that it's going to be used in the future for things that we didn't really envision when we first collected the data. So it's not really possible to give informed consent. Informed consent was actually first put in place because of major ethical violations in how physicians were treating patients in clinical studies.
Right.
And so it was really there. So you have a meeting of the minds of the physician and the patient. So you don't put them into an operation where they don't know the costs, or we don't infect them with syphilis and don't tell them, right? That's the reason why it was there. So now when we move to something else where there's just data incidentally generated, maybe it's billing data, it's perhaps even technically identifiable, though we can definitely put safeguards in place to prevent that. from happening. And in fact, if we can look at that data, we can do a lot of good for patients. Then, we need to have a way. I mean, it would actually be unethical in some cases not to look at that and figure out what's going on, because it can even prevent fraud and abuse and all of those sorts of things as well. Now, I think where machine learning is really coming to the fore right now, though, is, in the medical world, we actually have a system called IRBs. We can get waivers of informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
What's particularly important right now is that that where a lot of machine learning or artificial intelligence is being used right now is in places that are very, very far away from an institution like an institutional review board, like an IRB.
Right.
So it'll be, for example, places like Google, Facebook, the Chinese government, and so on and so forth. And these places aren't even subject to informed consent. They'll just collect data and use it.
Mm-hmm.
And they are not ethically bound at all, actually. They don't answer to anyone. And so this is actually one of my big concerns about the statement from the LRC, where they said that informed consent is requisite. So first of all, that actually only would apply to academics, because right now informed consent doesn't even really touch. I mean, there's no process or procedure outside of academics to do that, and we also know that that's a broken framework for ethics. And like I said, I mean, as Christians, we shouldn't be that surprised. We know that people can have power and they can misuse it. We really want to be people that when we have power, we use it well. And it can't be merely by just asking people. It has to be more than just that.
There's Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. Our guest is Dr. Joshua Swamidass, and we are talking about artificial intelligence. 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to give a call, 1-800-351-1212. So, Professor, we talked about artificial intelligence and these things like in medical uses as you're using them, but you've raised the point that there are a number of ways that artificial intelligence is being expanded in the in society, whether you're talking about Google and Facebook and their various types of learning programs where they learn if I'm clicking on, if I'm looking at a vacuum cleaner over here, and now I'm over here, I'm looking at, my wife comes on and she's looking at perfume or makeup or something of that nature. It learns from those things and begins to use those. And I guess they would say, I think Google and Facebook would, at least Facebook would say that they have a type of a consent form where they, where we know that they're using that, and I may even sign off on some of those things and can try to restrict them from using it. But there are concerns that not only companies, but governments are taking those things and going much further. You mentioned China, and that's certainly one of those where questions are being raised. So when we come back, let's talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence is being used for outside the informed consent and perhaps for nefarious purposes and some of the concerns that that raises. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to ask the professor a question, and we will be back in just a minute.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And on the line, we have Dr. Swamidass. Joshua Swamidass is an associate professor of Laboratory and Genomic Medicine in Washington University in St. Louis. And we've been talking about his article in the Wall Street Journal from a few weeks back on evangelicals and artificial intelligence. So, Doctor, Steve here in the studio asked a question which I think is an important one because of the way things change over time. You know, when I was a youngster, the notion of people, especially evangelicals, going out and getting plastic surgery and things like that, that's just not something you do. These days, it's very common among evangelicals that they might go out and get a nose job or a tummy tuck or something like that. There's other things that there's issues of fertility and whether or not you can design our babies and things like that. Issues that were considered taboo at one time that generally become a little more accepted, and at some point, 2, 3, 4 decades down the line, it's not even an issue. Is artificial intelligence something that's people kind of look at now and say, I'm concerned about that, but in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it's going to be part of everything and no one will think twice about it?
Well, I mean, it's already part of everything, and most of the time you don't think twice about it.
Mm.
I think Andy Crouch is a friend of mine. He mentioned, I actually really agree with this. He says that when it comes to artificial minds, things like, Lieutenant Commander Data from, Star Trek or the Cylons of Battlestar Galactica, in a lot of ways, we're way too soon to be making statements about that. But on the other hand, when it comes to things like how artificial intelligence is being used for sentencing reform and things like that, well, we're probably too late in some ways in starting to engage with this. We really need to catch up because these are important things that our technology that's not going back into Pandora's box are going to be part. I think they already are part of everything. Mm-hmm. And if we want to have a good society that handles this powerful technology well, we have to engage to think about how to have a good society here.
1-800-352-1212 if you'd like to talk to the professor. So let's talk about some of the more nefarious approaches with this, because I read frequently about in China, they're putting cameras up there to scan faces. As I understand it, they have artificial intelligence that's improving their ability to be able to read and discern faces and therefore track where people are moving back and forth within the community, and that always raises certain questions among us. What is the status of that type of artificial intelligence?
Well, I mean, it's here and it's growing.
We're in the early. Are we in the early days, or are we actually quite a ways along on it?
I think we're quite a ways along on it in important ways. And then, take that technology you're talking about. Let's say we have it up working really well. That's a really powerful technology. It can be used for good. If there's a bank robbery or a kidnapping, potentially you could find out and establish what's going on much quicker. Maybe it'll be very hard to commit violent crimes, for example, in the future with technology like this. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. At the same token, it becomes easier to crack down on political dissidents, on house churches in China, and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
So, we could pinpoint artificial intelligence as a problem, and in a way that's true. You could take out the artificial intelligence, that wouldn't work anymore. We could just as well point the cameras as a problem and outlaw cameras, because without cameras, that wouldn't work either, right? And ultimately, that's kind of misdirecting where the problem is. The problem is that, when technology comes, we can't usually hold it back, which is the case right now. And it can be used to create a better society or a worse society, and it has the potential for both. And this is part of what it means to be human, even, is to engage in that challenging effort of how to be people with our fallen natures that will still find a way and use technology to hopefully make it a better place.
We were talking about informed consent a minute ago, and where you can get informed consent from patients or individuals. But is getting informed consent, if a society, a government and or society is going to use these in very broad terms, for instance, for facial recognition and so forth, just scanning the population as it moves, is there any feasible way that that informed consent can even be applied there? Or do we just say, if you're going to X country, they've got cameras, you're going to be scanned, and either if you don't like it, don't go?
Well, when it comes to other countries, that's basically how it is right now. I mean, if you don't like how China does things, I mean, you best not go to China. For the United States, it's a different scenario where, we're a democracy, we have a little bit of a say. I think that's a good thing, too. What we need is not a whole set of rules, because I'll tell you what, whatever rules you put down, there's going to be a way to use them. What really needs to be is better institutional structures to have checks and balances on this in two places. One would be government, and another one would be large tech companies. So right now, medicine has the IRB system, which is actually working relatively well. Now, it has its problems, and also that can't be moved directly into these other places. But what's going on in medicine is we had such major ethical lapses that we decided, both through legislation and also through physicians standing up and saying, we're going to get our act together here. And we put this in place. So even if there are ethical abuses that happen in medicine, everyone steps up and self-corrects it. And it's usually like Lone Rangers, like the guy who did the CRISPR edits on those twins in China recently. Everyone denounced that because he broke the rules. Now, we don't have anything like that right now when it comes to the government, and when it comes to big tech companies and how they use it. And that's the type of fundamental reform that we need to do before we have our equivalent of, a major ethical abuse that comes to light.
It's a good point, because I was going to go to the tech companies next. And of course, in the U.S., these are private companies. So, but are they as forthcoming and as transparent as they should be? And if not, what should they be doing? Because, I mean, you had mentioned Google and Facebook, but you've got Alexa out there. You've got the various voice things that and you've got Siri on your phone. Yeah. So you've got a range of different things, and all of those, I think, have some element of artificial intelligence as they're trying to learn from questions I ask and things they hear. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you. I mean, I think the vast majority of people doing this, like most people, are not out there trying to do nefarious things. That's not how nefarious things happen. You think what you're doing is good. It just has a very negative impact on some people, and you don't see it, and when it comes to light, you don't care. That's how really horrible things happen. Now, the approach for tech companies has been, just trust us. We're smart people. We got this figured out. Just trust us.
I think there's less trust than there used to be.
Yeah, but that's their argument right now, yes. Right? And so what they're doing is something called, some people called recently an ethical theater. So they, Google, a couple months ago, had a big ethics committee at the very high level that was going to improve things, but then it disbanded after it even really first met. but regardless, even if they hadn't disbanded it, the problem is that Google's a gigantic company.
Yes.
There's, who knows, hundreds if not thousands of projects being proposed every month there and being applied, and none of them are being reviewed. There's no way a single committee could do that. So what really needs to be is a different set of checks and balances where people outside the companies that have loyalties elsewhere are really helping determine what is actually going to be ethical in these situations. And some cases it might be doing things that actually we don't know about, and that's okay. And sometimes it might be telling them that, this isn't actually something that's going to be ethical unless you make it well known and explain to people first, and then we will. And there's a whole set of things that can happen, but it's not something. I mean, if we understand human nature and history here, we just know this isn't something that we can trust people to police themselves on.
Yeah. When we come back we've got one more break. When we come back from that break, I'd like you to address the issue of can society or should society impose penalties on people who sort of break these standards? So for instance, if Facebook, Google, or somebody has Siri has if Apple has done something where they've sort of sidestepped these things and gone overboard, should there be some type of penalty? As if I haven't, especially if I haven't really signed on to these things or provided informed consent, is there some way that we're going to try to hold people and companies accountable for what they're doing? So when we come back, Dr. Joshua Swamidass, and we'll be talking a little bit more about artificial intelligence and evangelicals and what evangelicals' responses should be to the issue of artificial intelligence. Stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and we're on with our closing segment with Dr. Joshua Swamidass. He's an associate professor of Laboratory and Genomic Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis, and we've been talking about the evangelical response to artificial intelligence and what that means. So, Professor, we've got the government is increasingly using artificial intelligence. Private companies are increasingly using artificial intelligence. How do we hold? I assume with government, the way we hold them accountable is by voting, at least here. With private companies, how do we hold them accountable if we find out they've been exceeding what might be considered appropriate boundaries in using artificial intelligence? How do we hold them accountable?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think our starting point really needs to be, following Proverbs 4:7, like I put in my Wall Street Journal article, which says before anything else, we need to really seek understanding.
Mm-hmm.
This is a complex, evolving technology. I've been in the field for 15 years. Things that are happening now, I just didn't even know were possible 15 years ago.
Oh, yes.
Guarantee you,
and that raises real questions about what it's going to be like in 15 years from now.
Yeah, or even just 5 years or 2 years. I mean, it's an exciting field to be in, but even experts, we don't really know what we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a very tricky situation in some ways. We really need to understand before we do anything. It's important. We need to engage. We need to understand. Now, in terms of what to do with tech companies that violate the rules, the problem is that there is no rules, really. So that's almost an acronym for hopefully a future time, but it's not like there is rules for them to have violated that we can then come back to them for. That's part of the issue.
Well, let me ask you there. The European Union has been more aggressive in finding the tech companies for various things, and I don't know if they have if they're further along in artificial intelligence than the U.S., but has the European Union or another country, have they stepped up and done a better job than we have, in your opinion?
Well, so the European Union, I mean, so they're not perfect either, but they have been engaging this more proactively. There's also been recommendations coming out of societies that are good. The ACM has a really great set of guidelines that they're proposing. One of them, for example, is just to propose a right of recourse. So, for example, if there's a decision made that affects someone negatively, that person has a right to go ask why and to find out and to have it reviewed and potentially reversed. So, for example, if your health premiums go up because of artificial intelligence, that we have a right to go ask the company. They have to tell us. They have to not hide the fact that AI was involved. They have to be really clear about why and find out if they have to be transparent about all those things.
Well,
they can't just do it.
Take just a second to say, how could health premiums go up because of artificial intelligence? Health premiums have been going up ever since they passed the Affordable Care Act in big ways.
What I mean is like going up for one person much more than their neighbor, say, and you look at it like, I don't know why. I mean, and then you can kind of start listing out possible reasons. Why was it really? We have a right to know is part of what they're saying, and you can't just hide behind the fact that it's a black box. We don't really know, but we do know that AI is fair, so just deal with it. They're saying that that's not okay. We have a right to recourse. I think that's actually a really good starting point. In a way, it's kind of like, and we've all had experiences of being really treated unfairly in bureaucracies, right? With a whole bunch of rules and people that just miss something important. Well, in a lot of ways, AI can become like that, except for, what works in an institution where there's a bureaucracy like that, you can only just appeal to a higher authority, like call up the person's boss and say, this is crazy. Who do I go to get X done, right? And AI, if it's not implemented in a way that takes into account those human factors, it can be doing things that are unfair. That's just wasting time. It can have severe consequences, to be clear. And there's just no person to call to find recourse if it's missing something, right?
So artificial intelligence is based on big data. Is that a fair assessment, a fair thing to say? You've got to have a lot of data in order to be able to make the artificial intelligence work. And so I'm wondering, we've had data breaches in a number of companies and in the federal government. As we move forward with artificial intelligence, are we looking at more data being held and increasing the risk of somebody being able to breach and access that data?
Well, it depends. So one nice thing about AI is that if you have a ton of data and you train an effective algorithm, then you may not actually need that data anymore. Maybe that algorithm is enough, and you can't really extract the past data it's seen from like the trained model. So it might, in some ways, actually help us in that regard. But it also depends on a whole range of details and precisely what's done. I think one of the real exciting things and also challenging things about the field is that there's just an immense diversity there's just been a total explosion of the different ways that we can do things and apply it even.
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't a single model.
It's a good point. So take a couple of minutes just to express where you think some of what are we going to be seeing in artificial intelligence in the next 5 or 10 years that we might not be expecting right now?
Yeah, so we might see. So this is speculative, right?
Right. This is speculative.
We might see programs participating with us in online communities, and we don't even realize that they're just bots. And in some ways, it's already happening through Twitter. But one of the more surprising things for me this last year was a demonstration that Google did with the technology behind Google Assistant in the phones. They actually had their Google Assistant call up restaurants and get orders or reservations, and the computer would actually have this back and forth verbal exchange with the person on the other line, and the person wouldn't even recognize that it was a human, that it wasn't a human. It was just like a phone app, and that's like, on one hand, entirely impressive, right? But at the same time, that like raises an immense amount of issues. It really raises questions about, wait a minute, do they have to notify people when that's happening? Because they're clearly fooling a person. Of course, in this case, it's harmless. Mm-hmm. There's another algorithm that came out.
Well, it depends upon the restaurant they're making a reservation for me.
Yeah, well, this is a little more concerning, especially in our political season. Google has this technology where they can take like, for example, I'm talking to you right now. They can take audio recording of my voice, mm-hmm. and they can translate it to another language, but still retain the sound of my voice. So it'll sound like I'm speaking, for example, in Spanish. Mm. And what that means, to just connect some of the dots, that means that they can actually take someone's voice and make it sound change, but keep the content the same. And so you can imagine deep fakes or fake audio recordings during a political campaign. That technology, like we're here now for that. That could happen.
That is concerning. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a fascinating hour, and of course we I ask you a question. We don't really know where all this is going because more people may come up with various applications. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
That was Dr. Joshua Swamidass. He's at the Washington University in St. Louis. If you want to know more about his what he's doing, we've got that information up on our website at pointofview.net. You can find his Wall Street Journal article that he wrote about evangelicals, and you can also find the evangelical statement on artificial intelligence. I want to thank Steve for manning the phones today and Andrew for manning the controls. It's been some very interesting topics today. And so always go to Point of View, find out more information about us. You can also make a donation. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Merrill Matthews.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.